So today's topic is easy on the eyes, tips for keeping your data manageable and easy to read. And you probably already recognize our whole objective is to keep things simple, clutter-free, just as seamless as possible for you. So we'll do a lot of that within the system. In a lot of cases, we'll even force you to keep things simple, just to keep the system as easy to wield as possible for you and your team. But there are some things that you can do as well that will help reduce clutter, keep things as clean as possible, and that's what we're going to go over today. So let's dive right in. Let me head over to Pipeline. So I want to start here on our transactions list page, which obviously you get to by clicking transactions, and talk about the first few things I want to talk about are related to the data. Get rid of that there. Related to the data that you and your team enter into the system. And the first one is transaction names, right? So I'm looking at my list of transaction names here. It's really helpful to keep your transaction names as consistent and clean as possible. So as you can see here, they're all pretty much in the same format. They're all property addresses. I've got my street number first, and then the street name, zip code. If I've got any, if there are any new offers, I've got number 2, etc. So keeping that transaction naming as consistent as possible will just make it easy to read. Even when you've run searches, at a glance, you can see really easily what the names of the transactions are, okay? And one of the ways to facilitate that is under admin. Click admin settings under your name. And we're gonna open that in a separate tab here. Down here under transaction name instructions, you've got the ability to set some default transaction name instructions that will help guide users who are creating transactions to creating those standard names or using them in the format that you want them to. So you can indicate whatever you want that's going to help facilitate getting those names consistent, whether that means specifying what kind of format, enter, like this example here, enter complete property address including city, state, zip. Maybe you want to remind them to put the zip code because they often forget. Maybe we can see some offices that'll have the street number after the street name. So it'll say Main Street and then 123. And they've got their various reasons for doing that. But if so, they'd want to indicate that, right? Put the street number after the street name, etc. Okay. And the way that it looks when you're actually adding a transaction, once that helper text is there, is when they click into the transaction name, that text will appear right below. Just to, again, help guide them and give you that consistency. So that's the first area I wanted to mention regarding keeping your data clean. The second is under admin again, standard document names. Okay, definitely encourage you to use standard document names for a couple of reasons. Obviously, it keeps your data super clean and consistent, and not having doc names that are just crazy and all over the place helps a ton. But it has an added benefit also of whenever a doc is being added to a transaction and needs to be named as a result. Let me head over here to unassigned on a separate tab I've got here. Whenever I'm adding a doc to a transaction, like when I'm assigning it or uploading it or changing its name, right? We're going to assign it here. Whenever I'm doing so, I'll automatically get this drop down of standard document names, and it'll automatically be the default name will automatically be highlighted, so that all I need to do is start typing. So if I type, say, 2 letters, automatically from my long list of standard document names that you saw there a moment ago, it whittles it down to a very tolerable selection. So just with 2 characters typed, I can see that's probably my top selection here, the top one that matches the best, or one of the top ones that matches the best. I can select it. So in just a couple of clicks, I'm able to name my doc without having to type much at all. So it's got that added benefit of super easy to enter doc names, but as a result, you get really consistent doc naming, and they're just, again, not crazy and all over the place, okay? So definitely recommend using standard document names for that cleanliness of your document names. And then the last entry benefit is keeping your task names clean, right? These are the kind of the 3 biggies: your doc names, your transaction names, and then your task names. That's where much of the data entry happens. So let me head on over to a transaction here. So again, keeping your task names nice and clean, concise, will help readability, right? These checklists are read often. You're regularly going through these to see exactly what's been done, checking them off, etc. So the easier they are to read, the better. We do occasionally let you know that these really are just text fields so that you can enter any notes, sometimes even kind of status related to them. And that's certainly beneficial in a lot of cases, and we encourage that when it can be really helpful. For example, maybe you've got an inspection and you want to just put a little note there about a conversation you've had with the inspection company, etc. But we really also recommend that you keep those to a minimum for that readability purpose. So if you do need to add a note there and it's really beneficial, don't get too crazy and just have a whole narrative on there, because the alternative is just a really hard to read list that makes it difficult every time you need to check something off to actually go basically navigate through all of those notes. Okay, so keeping that clean is really helpful. So huge benefit there. Okay, keep those nice and tidy. So those are the 3 recommendations as far as keeping your data clean, the data that you enter clean. Then we've got a few other recommendations related to just reducing clutter in general and keeping things easy to read that aren't necessarily related to data entry. The first, also related to tasks, relates to hiding your @mention text. So let me head over here to tasks. I've got a tab open here. And let me show only the tasks where I've been @mentioned, just to get a nice list of tasks that have a lot of @mention text. Oops, I meant to have that there. Okay, so you can see here when I'm looking at my tasks that have @mentions in them. And if you're not familiar with @mentions, please feel free to check out either any of our articles related to that. You can just type @mention on the help site, or look at our past videos related to that. Super, super helpful feature, especially now that we recently added the ability to set visibility based on your @mentions. In other words, allowing a task to only be visible to those people that are @mentioned in it. Okay, so check that out if you're interested. But in general, once the @mention is there, you've got this text that references who the @mentioned people are. But sometimes often that can add to a lot of extra clutter when you don't need it. So hiding this @mention text, or using this feature here to hide the @mention text, allows for a much cleaner read when you do so, right? So hiding that, now I can read this a lot easier. There's less clutter. If I really don't need to see that @mention text, it's super, super helpful, okay? That said, one little recommendation is that when you are specifying your @mentions and using the role to define your @mentions, and just for those who don't know, you can specify an @mention using a person's name in various formats, as well as what their role is under manage users. So if you use role to define @mention or to mention someone using @mention, we recommend using a single word, because hiding the @mention text only supports a single word being hidden. So again, if you're using a role to specify @mention, we recommend using only single words. So instead of, for example, if you've got a role called transaction coordinator, maybe you just change it to TC, right? A single word TC. Okay. Okay, so that is the first method of keeping clutter clean, not data related. Also, using your columns. So on each of these pages here, transactions, tasks, unassigned, and unreviewed, you've got the ability to suppress columns. So if you really don't need to see those on a regular basis, we recommend unchecking those. So let's say I really don't need to see the visibility for a particular for any of the tasks, I can uncheck that, right? That gives me more space for the other columns. Maybe I don't even need to see which checklist it's on, right? So I can adjust that so that I'm only looking at information that's really useful to me, okay? Let me those back. Okay, got it? Actually, let me check them back. And again, that's on all 4 of these pages. So really, really helpful, especially for tasks and transactions. Well, unreviewed if you use that as well. But because they're so often used, you're on that page throughout the day constantly. So removing the columns that you really don't need to see can be helpful. Okay, alrighty. And then last couple things here are related to this transactions list also. When you click transactions, the transactions that are going to show by default are only those that are active. In other words, those that are not in closed expired, or fell through. So let's head over to our transaction statuses here. Got a tab open, which you get to under admin, and then transaction statuses, right? So anything in these bottom 3 sections here is considered inactive and will not appear on your list of default transactions. So what that means is if you've got a particular status that really is done, it's inactive, you don't need to see it on anymore going forward, make sure that it's in one of these top status categories, right? One of those. Oops. One of those, not in any of those bottom 3, okay? So just setting those up properly. And then the last area I wanted to mention is just to do a little house cleaning every now and again. Under admin here, where we're at right now, under admin, particularly under customize, and if you've got our commission module, also under financials, just going through and making sure you don't have any statuses that you no longer use. Things can change. You could have created statuses in the beginning that you thought would be useful and no longer are. Same for transaction labels. Also, if you need to add any more, same for document names for sure. And then down here, any of your agent fees, client fees, deduction types, etc., that might change if you use our commission module. So just keeping those clean means that every time the drop downs for these are used, they've got only the information that's needed and keeps everything as clutter-free as possible. All right.